Let us begin on DAF Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph. We had an interesting discussion. We saw 7 different opinions when you have Havdalah to make while you're making Kiddush for Yontif. Yontif falls out Motzai Shabbos. So as we know, you're supposed to combine Havdalah and Kiddush together. And we know that that we're going to see in a moment the whole psak of Yak Nahaz, which is a very famous acronym. But before we get there, we left out the Shehechianu because sometimes the 7th day of Pesach, that could fall out on a Motzai Shabbos. You could make Kiddush with Havdalah without the Shehechianu. So that was the discussion. The Yud Kuf Nun Hey Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah. That's the way Rav had said to do it. However, we had a 7-way machlokes, and we had seen differing opinions whether Havdalah should come before Kiddush, whether Kiddush should come before Havdalah. So, Shalach le Avua Dishmol le Rebbe. Avua Dishmol, the father of Shmuel, sent a message to Rebbe Yilamdenu Rabbeinu. We're on the 4th line of Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph. Okay. Seder Havdalos Heich. What's the order of making Havdalah when you're making Kiddush at the same time on a Motzai Shabbos that goes into Yontif? Shalach le Kach Omer Rabbi Yishmael bar Rabbi Yossi Shema Mishum Aviv Shema Mishum Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. This goes all the way back to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, who said Nahayak. Nahayak stands for Ner Havdalah Yain and Kiddush, and as the Rashbam explains, you want to be able to have the bracha of Yain sandwiched in between Havdalah and Kiddush, because he says that the Yain is going on both of them. It's going both on the Havdalah and on the Kiddush. So the best way to have it address both is to have it sandwiched in between the two. You put the Ner first because the Ner is an independent bracha. It doesn't need to be adjacent to any other bracha. So just get it out of the way first and say it first. Okay. And also you notice that he puts Havdalah before Kiddush. And Omer Rebbe Chanina, Mashal de Rebbe Yoshua ben Chananya, Lemelech sheyotze va'afarchos nichnas, malavinas hamelech ve'achar kach yotzim likras afarchos. And the way that Rebbe Yoshua ben Chananya understands it, we can explain with the following analogy. If you have a king that's been visiting with you and the king is leaving, and just as the king is leaving, a lower minister is coming to visit, you first have to escort the king out before you can welcome the lower minister. So in the same vein, Shabbos is as a higher Kedusha than Yom Tov. It's appropriate to say Havdalah and to escort Shabbos out before you welcome in the Yom Tov, and that's why you should make Havdalah before Kiddush. Now, we had seen an opposing svara from Rav yesterday. The opposing svara is that it's not respectful to Shabbos to make Havdalah before Kiddush, because you're sort of showing, hey, I can't wait to get rid of Shabbos. Shabbos, get out of here. I want to make room for Yontif. Right? So that's disrespectful from the other perspective to say Havdalah before Kiddush. That's why Rav says, say Kiddush before Havdalah. Say that I'm reluctant to escort Shabbos out, so I'll make Kiddush for Yontif first, and only then afterwards will I make Havdalah. My Havdalah. So what was the upshot? Abaya Amar Yak Zina, V'Rava Amar Yak Nahaz. You see that both Rabbi and Rava paskin like Rav, who they both agree that Kiddush has to precede Havdalah. The only machlokas, and also they hold that Yayin has to be the first and has to come before Havdalah. And they, because of Tadir, like we had learned yesterday, because it's the most frequent or common bracha, you make it during the week as well. And so the machlokas between the two of them is really where you position the Shehechianu bracha. They both agreed to that it should be Yak Naha, Yayin Kiddush Ner Havdalah. And the question is, when it's not the 7th day of Pesach, let's say it's the 1st day of Pesach, or the 1st day of Sukkot, or Shmini Atzeres, or Shavuos, where do you say the Shechianu? Abayah says, say the Shechianu right after Kiddush, before Havdalah. And Rava says, no, save the Shechianu for the end. The Hilchis HaKaravin, we paskin like Rava. So the Rashbam explains the difference of opinion between Abayah and Rava. Abayah says, why are you making a Shechianu? Not because of Havdalah, that you're saying goodbye to Shabbos. That's not why you make a Shechianu. You say a Shechianu because Yontif is entering. So logically, it should come right after Kiddush, says Abayah, because that's the reason why you're saying Shechianus. Therefore, he says Yak Zina. That's a Yain Kiddush, a Shechianu, and then Ner and Havdalah. But Rava disagrees. Rava says Shechianu always comes at the end of a set of brachas. And because Shechianu always comes at the end, even when you're grouping together Kiddush and Havdalah, save the Shehechiyanu for the end, where you thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for bringing us to this time of the year.
Not only that, but if the day hasn't left yet, then how do you have a Shehechiyanu? It's still Shabbos until you make Havdalah.
That's an interesting point. Interesting point. Okay. Okay. Zman. Yes. Rav Huna bar Yehuda iklu lebei Rava, aisu lekamayhu ma'oru b'samim. Now, Rav Huna bar Yehuda once came to the house of Rava, and they were making Havdalah. This was a regular Havdalah on a regular Motzoi Shabbos, and they brought out the candle and they brought out b'samim. So Baruch Rava abisamim bereisha v'hadar amor. So Rava first made the bracha on b'samim, and then he made the bracha on the candle. That's what we do, right? So Amar Lei v'ha bein beishamai bein beisilol ma'or bereisha v'hadar abisamim. But wait a minute. Both Beishamai and Beisilol agree that you first have to make the bracha on the fire, and then you make a bracha on the b'samim. Umayhi, where do you see this? Ditnan, the Mishnah says in brachos, Beishamai omrim ner umazon b'samim v'havdalah, Beisilol omrim ner u'b'samim umazon v'havdalah. Now this machlokus, the Rashbam explains, is like we talked about yesterday. Let's say you only have 1 cup of wine. And therefore, you're at a dilemma because you want to say Havdalah over a cup of wine, and you also want to have a Malava Malka and bench on Motzoi Shabbos for your Malava Malka with a cup of wine. The Gemara had said that when you have no other option because you only have 1 cup, you can wash and say Hamotzi and have your meal before Havdalah, and then when it's time to bench, you bench al hakos, and then you make Havdalah together with the benching.
No, like that, though.
No, well, I gave a shiur last night because of Dr. Blau's comments, where you talked about the kos shel bracha shel shaloshudas. I gave a whole shiur on why we osim mitzvahs chavilos, even when we have another cup available. In other words, the Gemara only says that you're allowed to bundle 2 mitzvahs together when you only have 1 cup.
Right.
We bundle the kos shel benching for shaloshudas together with the kos of Havdalah, even though I would venture to say the BAYT's budget could afford an extra cup of grape juice, right? So the question is, why is that? The question is, why is that? What, Peter? You're skeptical about our budget? Anyway, so
you just solicited. You just had a bid. You just had bids for it on.
Right.
We paid a lot. I think they could afford it.
We paid $300 for the eye.
So anyway,
out of the wine, yeah, they didn't.
So there's a whole shiur that'll be up on. A whole shiur will be up on Kosher Tube momentarily. You can see the shiur. It's an actually very interesting discussion. But in any event. What's going on over here is, and by the way, and you'll see from that shiur why we don't paskin this way. The Shulchan Aruch paskins this way, that you bundle the 2 together, and you forego Havdalah until after your Malava Malka.
Really?
But we don't paskin like that Shulchan Aruch, and it's based on a Magen Avram that you'll see from the shiur. But the Mishnah says that the machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is that when you bench with the Havdalah, what's the order? So Beis Shammai say first you make a bracha on the candle, then you bench, then you make a bracha on the b'samim, and then you say the bracha of Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. Beis Hillel say first the candle, then the b'samim, then the benching, and then the Havdalah. But both of them agree that the b'samim the nair precedes the b'samim, right? So how can you make the b'samim first and then the nair? So Ani Rava Basreva Amar Zudiver Reb Meir. So Rava explained. He said that's only according to Rabbi Meir, the way you've cited the machlokas. Aval Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo nechleku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel al hamazon shu batchila v'al Havdalah shu basof. But Rabbi Yehuda understands the machlokas totally differently. He says everyone agrees that you bench first and you make Havdalah at the end. Al monechleku al amor ve'al habesamim. Beis Shammai Omer ma'or ve'achar kach besamim, Beis Hillel Omer besamim ve'achar kach ma'or. That the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is that Beis Shammai say first the candle and then the besamim, and Beis Hillel say first the besamim and then the candle. Now, I was told that someone told me from the art school that there's a Ritva who explains the machlokas. What's the compelling argument to whether you should make besamim first or ner first? Well, the truth of the matter is that if I wanted to wax philosophically, I could explain as follows. What's the reason why we make a bracha on besamim? To restore the Neshama Yisera that we've lost.
To strengthen us from the
to strengthen us, right? Yeah. And so the Besamim represents the weakness of Chol and the sort of the Yerida that we experience during the week. What does the light represent? Light represents the creation of fire that was created on Motzoi Shabbos, that man was given this gift of fire. So it represents the potential of the work week to be productive. And so those are almost opposing attitudes. That one is light representing the potential of productivity during the week, and Besamim represents the Yerida, the downfall or the descent that man has to go into because of the work week. And so perhaps the machlokus between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is which one comes first and which one comes second. Mm-hmm. Beis Shammai therefore says, first make a light on the candle, but then acknowledge that in the final analysis, when you make the bracha on the Besamim, you realize that you're descending into darkness, and you're descending into a week that is devoid of a Neshama Yisera. But Beis Hillel say no. Acknowledge that there is a descent taking place, but end off with an optimistic tone of there is light, because we have fire, we have productivity, we have potentiality in front of us. Anyway, I don't know if you like that or not, take it or leave it. But in any event, because, Beis Hillel is the eternal optimist and Beis Shammai is the eternal pragmatist. But v'amar Rabbi Yochanan nahagu ha'am ke Beis Hillel v'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yochanan had said that our minhag is to go like Beis Hillel, using Rabbi Yehuda's explanation, that according to Beis Hillel, you first make a bracha on the Besamim and then you make a bracha on the Eish. So therefore you see that's why I do Besamim first and then Eish, and that's how we paskin. Rav Yaakov bar Abba ikul lebei Rava chazi de baruch bor pri hagafen akasa kama v'hader baruch akasa de birkas avi ishti. So Rav Yaakov bar Abba once comes to Rava's house, and they're having just a regular seuda, and as we'll see in just a second, that this seuda is taking place, because we're going to continue the story later, but it's taking place on Shabbos, and when it comes time to bench, he was, first of all, he was drinking wine, and he made a bracha on the first cup of wine that he drank in the course of the meal. And then, after benching, because you benched ala kos, he made a bracha on the kos shel bracha, made another bori pri hagafen, and drank the wine after benching. So Amar lei, lama lecha kulei hai, habarach lan mar chad zimna. So he said to him, why was it necessary for you to make a bori pri hagafen to drink the kos of benching? You already made a bori pri hagafen at the beginning of the meal. Why doesn't that cover the wine afterwards as well? So Amar leiki havinan bereish galusa hachi havdinan. So his response to Rava's response to him was, well, listen, this is what I've seen being done in the residence of the Reish Galusa by great rabbis who were there. So Amar lei tenach bereish galusa dehachi avid de what's the girsa over here? The safek maisi lan, safek lo maisi lan. Ha hacha hamanach kasa kaman v'daiti niluya. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba says that's not a good raya, because in the house of the exilarch, since you're a guest and you have no idea what foods and beverages they're going to be bringing out, then the reason why you make a new bracha on new wine that they bring out for you is because it's unexpected. And there's what's called a hesech hadas. You don't anticipate it, and therefore when you made the bracha on the first cup of wine, you didn't know they were going to bring out other wine, and therefore you have to make a new bracha on the new cup they bring out. But over here, the wine was on the table. You're the balabas. You know you're going to have a kos shel bracha for benching. So of course you had that in mind when you made the bori pri hagafen at the beginning of the meal. So why did you have to make another bracha? So Amar lei ana avdi ketalmidei de Rav. So Rav says, because I go like the students of Rav. Who were they? De Rav Bruna v'Rav Chananel, talmidei de Rav havu yasvi b'suda. So once they were sitting at a meal, and koi alayu Rav Yeba Saba. Rav Yeba Saba was their attendant. He was attending to their needs. I guess he was the balabas. And Amrulei Havlon v'nivrich. And they said to him, well, it's time for us to bench. L'sof Amrulei Havlon v'nishti. And then they changed their mind. They said, you know what, before we bench, let's have something to drink. Let's have one more glass of wine. So Amr Lahu, Hachi Amarav, Keven Damrisu Havlon v'nivrich, Itzer l'chula mishti. And he said, no, Rav paskins that once you've said it's time to bench, you're not allowed to eat or drink anything, because you've basically, through your declaration, you've shown that you're Mesiach Das, you've already determined in your mind that you're not going to be eating and drinking anymore. And so my time at daschisu daitaichu, right? That's what I just said. So therefore, the argument is that benching by itself de facto is a declaration that my meal is over. So whatever brachas I've made on foods and beverages before benching can no longer be appended to things that I'm going to be eating and drinking after benching. And that's why I have to make a new Bori Pri Hagafen after the Birkas Hamazon. Amemor Marzutra Ravashi Abu Yasvi Besuda Bekoyalayu Ravacha Berei de Rava. Now we have another story that there are three great rabbis, Amemor, Marzutra, and Ravashi, were sitting at a meal, and Ravacha was attending to them. Amemor Baruch al Kol Kasa V'Kasa, Umarzutra Baruch Akasa Kama V'Akasa Basra, and Ravashi Baruch Akasa Kama V'Sulo Baruch. Each one of them displayed a different position when it came to drinking wine. Brachas on drinking wine. Amemar made a new bracha on every glass of wine that they brought out for him. Marzutra made a Bari Pri Hagafen on the first cup and did not make any further brachos, except for the kos shel bracha, except for the benching cup. And Rav Ashi did not make a bracha at all except for the first cup. Now, it seems from this story that they weren't eating together, because if they were eating together, then there should have only been one person making a bracha on the kos shel birkas hamazon. Or perhaps you could argue that they were eating together and each one wanted to drink from the kos. So that would be another possibility.
So Maimer did make bracha achron after every single one?
No, we're not talking about bracha achron. We're talking about a bracha rishona.
I understand, but
so a Maimer said a bracha rishona. Every time they brought out a new glass of wine, he made a new bori pri hagafen.
So he didn't make a bracha achron after the first one?
No, because he was in the middle of the meal. It's in the middle of the meal.
A new bracha, then?
You'll see. Wait, hold on to your hat. Okay. So Amar lahu Ravacha barava anan keman na'avid. So Ravacha says to these rabbis, he says, I'm confused. How should I paskin? Each one of you has got a different way of doing things. So Amemar Amar Ana Nimlach Ana. Amemar says, well, the reason why I made a new bracha on each glass of wine is because I didn't realize they were going to bring out more wine. So when I made my first Borei Hagafen, I thought it was only on the first on this one cup. When they brought out more wine, originally I thought I'm not going to drink, but I saw it was a great vintage. It was a good glass of wine. So I made another bracha. And so Mendel, that answers your question. That's why Maimer made a new bracha on each kos. Well, it depends. It depends whether it's a... All right, you're right. You're right. I stand corrected. It was the same wine, but he didn't realize he was going to be thirsty. He didn't know they were going to bring out more wine.
It was empty, the bottle.
Right. You're right. Okay, good. So Marzutra Amar Ana Da'avdi Ketalmidei de Rav. And Marzutra said, well, I paskin like the Rav Brun and Rav Chananel that we just saw previously. They held that the Birkas Hamazon forms a Hesech Hadas between what you ate and drank before the meal. So therefore, you need to make another Bar Pri Hagafen only for the kos shel bracha. And that's why I made a bracha only on the first and on the last. And Rav Ashi Amar Les Hilchasa Ketalmidei de Rav. And Rav Ashi says, I only made a bracha on the first cup because I don't paskin like these students of Rav. And I'll prove it to you. Dehayom tov shechalios acher hashabbos, va'amar Rav yaknaha. Because Rav himself contradicts that position of his students. Now, the way Tosfos explains the proof is as follows. How did Rav paskin? He said, first make a bracha on the yayin, and then make the bracha of kiddush, and then break the bracha of ner, and then make the bracha of havdalah, and then drink the wine. So what do you see from here? You see that even though there's a huge amount of space and of verbiage that is recited between the Bori Pri Hagafen and the drinking of the wine, that does not form a Hesech Hadas. And in the same vein, just because you bench between the first cup and the last cup, that also does not form a Hesech Hadas. And therefore, you're justified in drinking the wine after Birkas Hamazon without making a new Bori Pri Hagafen. That's the way Tosfos understands the proof. But the Gemara says Velohi, but that's not a good analogy, says the Gemara. The Rav Ashi is mistaken because Hasam Akar Daite Mi Mishtaya, Hachalo Akar Daite Mi Mishtaya. The difference between the two is that when you're making Havdalah and Kiddush and you make the Bori Pri Hagafen at the beginning, your whole time you're anticipating drinking the wine. So there's no Hesech Hadas, there's no interruption through this declaration of Kiddush and Havdalah from the drinking of the wine. But when you're saying Birkas Hamazon, that de facto is an acknowledgement that my eating and drinking has come to an end. And so therefore, that by definition is what we call a Hesech Hadas, is an interruption in your thoughts. about eating and drinking, and that's why you'd have to make a new Bori Pri
It really
Haggafa.
seems similar to Kiddush, though. You're holding the
Yeah,
cards.
because I was going to say that. It's holding
in
the
front
cards
of
the
you,
whole time.
you say-
But even so, the words themselves
Indicate that it's
basically, and that's the way I'm explaining it. That's why. That's exactly because your point is exactly why I think you have to phrase it this way. The words themselves are a declaration that Savano vehosarnu, right? It's over. The meal's over. That's it. The game over, right? So that's why even when you're holding the kos and you know you're going to drink, but it's a new drinking that cannot be attached in any way to the Bori Pri Haggafa that you made during the meal.
So the answer to the question is what's more important, what a person says or his action.
Right. Okay, could be. Anyway, Kimatala Abduli. Now we're going back to the story that we saw before about when Rav Yaakov Rav Yaakov bar Abba came to Rav's house. Remember, we talked about making the bracha on the wine. It was on Shabbos, and then it was time to make Havdalah in that story. So, Kam Shamei va'adle gavuka mishraga. So Rav's attendant took a torch and lit the torch from an existing candle. So Amarle lamalach kulei hai haman chashraga. So Rav Yaakov says to Rava, why was it necessary for you to light a torch? You have that candle there. Why don't you just make the Bori Morei Ha'esh on the candle? So the Gemara answers him. So Rava says to him, Amarle shama midaite denafshe ka'avid. He says, I don't know why the attendant decided to do it. I didn't instruct him. So Amarle ilo shamiale minei demar lo hava avid. So Rav Yaakov was too smart for that answer. He said, I know that if your attendant had not seen you do this and received instructions, he wouldn't have done it on his own. So there's got to be a reason for it. So Amarle lo sarver leimar avuka la havdalah mitzvah min amuvchar. He says, well, don't you hold that it's a mitzvah min amuvchar? It's a preferred method of mitzvah to make havdalah, the Bori Morei Ha'esh, on a multi-wick flame, more than just a single wick flame. It shows like a larger fire, so it's more chashuv, it's more honorable. The question of this story is, of course, why didn't Rava answer that answer right away? Why was he trying to cover up that that's the answer? I would suggest that the reason was that he did it out of modesty. In other words, it's clear that the psak halacha does not require you to use an avuka, does not require you to use a torch, but it's only a mitzvah min amuvchar. So Rava didn't want to burden his student with his own personal chumras, right? If the student is not aware of this and he hasn't been doing this all along, so why should I burden him to have to find a torch every Motzai Shabbos? But since Rav Yaakov persisted, he said, okay, I'll tell you, it is a mitzvah min amuvchar to use a torch. Okay, so Pasach ve'Amar, Hamavlu ben Kodesh l'chol ben Or l'choshech ben Yisrael la'amim ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish simei hamas. So when Rava was making Havdalah, he made 4 statements. Let's count them. Number 1, Hamavlu ben Kodesh l'chol, God who divides between the holy and the profane or the mundane. Number 2, ben Or l'choshech, he divides between light and darkness. Ben Yisrael la'amim, number 3, between Israel and the nations. Ben Yom HaShvi l'sheish simei hamasa, number 4, between the 7th day and the other 6 days of work or of action. So Amar lei lama lacha kulei hai. So Rabbi Yaakov said, why did you have to make this whole long formulaic expression of Havdalah? V'ha'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'chol zui Havdalah shel Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Don't we know that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, when he made Havdalah, just said one line bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'chol. So why did you have to say all of this other stuff? So Amar lei ana kehas virali da Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Yoshia. Hapoches lo yivchos megimel v'hamosif lo yosif al zayin. He says, because I hold of the following statement of Rabbi Yoshia, that when you make Havdalah, you should not use less than 3 phrases, nor should you use more than 7 phrases. Now, what's the significance of these things? We don't know clearly from the Gemara at this point, at least, but one thing is clear. There's an advantage of using 3, and there's an advantage of using 7. So the question that he asked him was, why'd you use 4? Either use 3 or use 7, but what's the kunz of using 4 phrases? So Amar lei v'hamar lo tlasa amar v'lo sheva. That's why he says to him, you didn't use 3 and you didn't use 7. So Amar lei ivra ben yom hashvi l'sheishis yemei hamasa me'ein chasimahi. He says, no, I'm really using 3 phrases. Number 1, Hamavlu ben Kodesh l'chol. Number 2, ben Or l'choshech, and number 3, ben Yisrael la'amim. My fourth statement of Ben Yom HaShvila Sheishis Yemei HaMaaseh is not an added phrase, but rather it is necessary because it is a preface to the last line of the bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem HaMavul Ben Kodesh L'chol. So it is almost like a foreshadowing of one of the last bracha line, which is Hamavdol Ben Kodesh L'chol. And I basically just said a different way of saying it, which is that God separates between Shabbos and the 6 days of the week. Va'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Hamavdol Tzarech Sheyomer Me'in Chasima. And therefore, I'm only going like Shmuel, who says that when you make Havdalah, you have to say a preface before the Chasima, the last line, the last bracha line, and you have to sort of provide like a preview of it in the line before. And Samach L'Chasima, so right before you finish the bracha. Upumpadisoi Amri Me'ein Pesichaso Samach L'Chasimaso. However, other rabbis from Pumpadisa disagree, and they say that when you finish Havdalah right before you say the Chasima, you have to give a recap of the opening line of Havdalah, not the closing line of Havdalah. What's the difference between the two? Normally, when you make a regular Havdalah, the ending and the beginning are really the same theme. Hamavdol ben kodesh l'chol. Right? So what's the difference? So my bina, that's the Gemara's question. So Ika beinayhu yom tov shechalios acher hashabbos, dechasminon ben kodesh l'kodesh. The answer is, you're right. On a regular Havdalah, there is no difference whether you recap the opening of the bracha or the ending of the bracha because they're identical. Hamavdol ben kodesh l'chol. The difference will be between these two opinions is when you're making Havdalah Motzoi Shabbos that leads into Yantiv, when you make Kiddush and Havdalah together. Right? That's where the Psicha and the Chasima are different, because your ending bracha is Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Kodesh, but the opening of that paragraph is Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Chol. So the question is, the prefatory line before the Chasima, should it emphasize Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Chol, or should it emphasize Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Kodesh? So Mando Amr Me'ein Pesichasan Samach L'Chasimasan Lo Boy L'Meimar Ben Kedusha Shabbos L'Kedushas Yom Tov Yivdalta. If you learn that you're supposed to recap the opening, then you wouldn't say the line of God, you divided between the holiness of Shabbos and the holiness of Yom Tov before the Chasima. Umando Amar Me'ein Chasimasan Samach L'Chasimasan Boy L'Meimar Ben Kedusha Shabbos L'Kedushas Yom Tov Yivdalta. But if you hold that you have to give a preview of the Chasima before the Chasima and not recap the Psicha, since the Chasima is Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Kodesh, God, you divide between holiness and holiness, then the previous statement is, God, you divide between the holiness of Shabbos and the holiness of Yom Tov, which is like the Chasima. Now, that ends our Gemara today, but since we have a few more minutes, let me just point out that Tosfos over here, the third Tosfos on the page, has an interesting analysis of the text of the Havdalah that we make when Motzoi Shabbos is a Yantiv, and we make the Havdalah in Kiddush. So he says like this: Shoal Rabbi Ephraim, one of the Bali Tosfos was named Rabbeinu Ephraim, and he asked Rabbeinu Tam, Lama nahagu ha'olam lahosif. Not only do we say Ben Kedusha Shabbos l'Kedushas Yom Tov Yivdalta, that's one line that we say in the Havdalah of Motzoi Shabbos going into Yantiv, but we also say Ve'es Yom HaShvi'i Misheishes Yemei HaMaaseh Kidashta. We also say that you've divided between the 7th day and the 6 days of the week, and Hivdalta Ve'Kidashta es Amcha Yisrael B'Kedushasecha. You have separated and sanctified your nation Israel with your holiness. He says, De'ein zelo me'ein psicha v'lo me'ein chasima. That last line that we say, that you've divided Israel in your holiness, really has nothing to do with the opening of Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Chol, and it has nothing to do with the ending, which is Hamavdol ben Kodesh l'Chodesh. So why do we do that as the last line before the Chasima in our text of the Havdalah, which is the same as what Rabbeinu Ephraim's was in the medieval period? So Veheshiv lo Rabbeinu Tam. So Rabbeinu Tam explained to him. He said, Mishum chibas hayom herichu kedei lomar pam echas me'ein zayin Havdalas. And he said, remember that the Gemara had said you never do less than 3 phrases or never more than 7. So on a regular Havdalah, we do 3 phrases. But on a Havdalah that's going into Yantif, because it's a special Havdalah, we use 7 phrases. And these 7 phrases all lead into the chasima. And what are the 7 phrases? So he goes like this. Number 1, ben kodesh l'chol echad. So hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol, that's phrase number 1. Ben or l'choshech, between light and darkness, that's second phrase. Ben Yisrael la'amim is gimel, between Israel and the other nations, that's the third phrase. Ben yom hashvi'i l'sheishes yemei hama'as dalet, between the 7th day and the 6 days of the week, that's number 4. Ben kedusha Shabbos l'kedushas Yom Tov hivdalta, between the sanctity of Shabbos and Yom Tov you have separated. So what is that? Perish Yom Tov shari midi de ochel nefesh. So that's number 5. That the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is that on Yom Tov you're allowed to cook and do things for ochel nefesh. So that's another division. So now we're up to 5. Bes yom hashvi'i misheishes yemei hamasa kidashta. Hainu shel cholo shel moed deshari davar ha'avud uveshabes aser. So he says number, I think we're up to, is it 6 or 5? Okay, well let me look.
This is 6.
4, 5, 6.
Yeah, okay, so this is number 6. That on the 7th day, you've divided it from the 6 days of the week. That's not the same thing that we said before, which is Shabbos and Chol. This is between Shabbos and Chol HaMoed. We're showing another distinction or another nuance of holy day, which is Chol HaMoed. And because the difference between Shabbos and Chol HaMoed is that on Chol HaMoed you're allowed to do any malacha that involves financial loss, right? Which is very different from Shabbos and Yom Tov. Zechi luk Shabbos mi Yom Tov vihi havdalah echas harei hey. I'm sorry, that's 5. Excuse me. I got the count. I messed up the count. So let's just go back again. Ben Kodesh l'chol is 1. Ben Or l'choshech is 2. Ben Yisrael la'amim is 3. Ben Yom Hashvi l'sheishes yemei hamas is 4. That's between Shabbos and the rest of the work week. And Ben Kedusha Shabbos l'Kedushas Yom Tov Hivdalta is 5, to divide between Shabbos and Chol HaMoed. And then we have 6 and 7, which is as follows. Hivdalta v'kidashta es amcha Yisrael b'kedusha secha shtei havdalas. That last phrase is really 2 divisions. You've divided the Jewish people up, but you've divided them into 3 parts instead of just 2 parts. How is that? Ben Kohanim Levim v'Yisraelim. So because that's 2 divisions and not 1 division, so therefore it counts as 6 and 7. And therefore, v'havi me'ein chasima de ben kodesh l'kodesh. And that's why it is analogous to the ending of ben kodesh l'kodesh, because all of the Jewish people are kodesh. It's a beautiful thought that you've set aside, you've made divisions within Klal Yisrael themselves to divide, to create different echelons of Jewish people, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, and that in itself is me'en ha-chasima. That's a semblance of the chasima, which is hamavdil ben kodesh l'kodesh. That God, you divide between holy and holy. Just like you divide up the Jewish people in different groups, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim, so too you divide chronology between holy days of Shabbos and holy days of Yom Tov. Not that one is holy and one is not holy. Everyone is holy.
Doesn't Rabbi Yoshia sound like he's giving a range between 3 and 7? Why are they fixated on 3 or 7?
So that's the way I anticipated your question. That's why I expressed it in the following. And this is what Tosfos points out. If it's a range between 3 and 7, then there has to be some benefit of 3 and some benefit of 7. Because it can't be arbitrary. So 3 must be based on a pasuk and 7 must be based on a pasuk. And therefore, if you're going to choose your phrases, then you should either choose 3 or 7. Because it's not arbitrary. 3 must have significance in 7. Right. So that's why he said, why Davka 4? What made you choose 4?
Because Rabbi Yoshia sounds like it's a range.
I understand, but you understand how I'm answering.
Yeah.
Okay.